this morning for the far side of the world.
Hello, and welcome to Small Places episode number 2. This week on Small Places, we continue our exploration of the lost city of Petra. Last time on Small Places, we crossed the Jordanian desert, arriving in the village of Wadi Musa. From there, a short walk through the Sikh, the narrow gorge that serves as the entrance to the city of Petra. At the end, we discovered the majestic Treasury. But Petra is more than just the Treasury, as we will soon see. Near the Treasury and the exit from the Sikh, there is first one other much smaller tomb, carved like the Treasury out of the sandstone cliffs. Anywhere else in this architecture would be awe-inspiring. But here, across from the Treasury, it is overshadowed by the grandeur of the rest of the city and is bypassed by most travelers. So, with a quick look back to the entrance of the Sikh, we will turn and head down into the main city of Petra. Further into the city, the first thing we see are more tombs. Rows and rows of tombs. Most are very similar in style, tall, smooth faces, some around 3 or 4 stories high, others reaching up perhaps 8 to 10 stories. Along the top is a stepped structure or pattern. A small passageway into the interior is centered at the very bottom. Many of these tombs are quite weathered. The Jordanian government is currently working on fully restoring one of the tomb faces, which should give visitors an idea of what they would have looked like when they were carved new. The interiors, of course, have been cleared of anything they may have once contained. The step pattern lining the top of the tombs is particularly interesting. Local guides relate that the steps are symbolic of the journey into heaven, steps leading upwards, with the final step disappearing into the afterlife. One of the larger of the royal tombs in Petra is the urn tomb, which was converted into a church by the Byzantines and consecrated in 447 AD. Next to the urn tomb are a number of other large and impressive structures, including the Corinthian tomb and the awesome palace tomb. The palace tomb is actually the largest of all the tombs at Petra, but is quite weathered as a result of its exposed location. Nonetheless, it is still quite impressive. There are tombs everywhere, both inside and outside the city. One almost starts to believe that Petra was more a city of the dead than of the living. But Petra was a city of the living. Looking closer, around the tombs and across from the monuments, and we can see caves, rows and rows of caves. It was in these caves that the citizens of Petra called home. Hewn from the sandstone, entire houses, most with multiple interconnecting rooms. And there is one structure which certainly confirms Petra's status as a living, thriving, populous city, and it's just ahead. A huge amphitheater. Like the rest of the Nabatean architecture at Petra, this amphitheater is carved into the hillside. While not as large as some other theaters in the region, the amphitheater at Petra is nonetheless imposing. Completely exposed to the wind and rain, most of the seats are badly deteriorated, but it is still possible to climb a short ways up, take a seat, and imagine what the theater was once like. Just sit and rest and dream the dreams of the ancients. Not only was Petra a thriving city some 2,000 years ago, but in fact Petra was still a city full of Bedouin as late as the 1950s. At that time, Petra was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which meant that the Bedouin had to be relocated and housing built for them nearby. Looking into the interior of some of the dwellings here, one can begin to get a feel for what life here was like. Colorful beauty intertwined with unyielding stone. As I've mentioned before, Petra was conquered by the Romans in the early 2nd century AD, and as the Romans are wont to do, once they conquered Petra, they built in Petra, and most of their building was concentrated here, along what is known as the Colonnade Street, as it was once thickly lined with colonnades on both sides. Just a few hundred years after the Romans built up this section of Petra, it was destroyed by a large earthquake which struck the area in 551. Of all the buildings along the Colonnade Street, only this one remains standing, because it is joined throughout with wood rather than entirely mortar. Finally, along the Colonnade Street is a building known as the Great Temple. The locals say it was a temple to Apollo. There is some disagreement amongst archaeologists, however, with some believing it was rather the local seat of government. Next time on Small Places, we leave the deserts of the Middle East for the tropical paradise of the Dominican Republic. Small Places can be found on the web at www.smallplaces.org, where along with the podcast you can find a photo gallery with higher resolution versions of the images in the podcast. Comments or questions can be posted to the blog or sent via email to jim@smallplaces.org. Small Places is a production of Small Places Limited and is distributed on a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license, which means you can distribute a copy to every camel caravan which stops by. Just don't trade it for a bolt of silk and a box of nutmeg. Thanks for joining us.